Hello, everyone, and welcome back to an exciting AdvisorShares AlphaNooner. We are very excited to welcome back Cresco Labs' Charlie Bachtell, fresh back from DC in post-inauguration. Excited to sit down and kind of catch up on that weekend and then spend some time kind of talking through the industry in 2025 and, of course, Cresco itself. If you're out there, one, thanks for joining. We really appreciate it. And two, if you have any questions, comments you want to throw in, you are always welcome to put them in the chat. Good reminder, you can do them on every platform except for Instagram. With all that out of the way, though, thanks for joining, Charlie. Really appreciate it. How are you doing? How are you recovering? We were just talking earlier. It's a lot of busy time right now.
No, Mackenzie, thanks for having me. Good to see you again. We did get to bump into each other down in DC. It was nice to see you. But yeah, no, good to be back and happy to be here today.
Yeah, of course. Well, it was also very, very great to see you and kind of a fun, interesting thing. I know we've done some interesting events kind of together and been able to bump into you. But this definitely seemed different, I think, more important, kind of more momentous in some way. But I know beyond the event that we were at together, you were doing kind of back-to-back-to-back events. Anything you can share in terms of, highlights, things that you think were interesting or you would pull out from just the series of events that you were in DC?
Sure. Yeah, I think first and foremost, it was good to have a broader presence as an industry, as a subject matter. Again, like being at an event with yourself and Noah was terrific. Don Murphy was also there and had a chance to connect with him. Kim Rivers from True Leave and her team were also a part of everything that I was a part of down there. And even the broader government relations teams from many of the larger operators in the space were all in DC for this. And I can tell you that's a first. The industry did not have that presence and that objective or initiative back 4 years ago, or definitely prior to that, at least to my knowledge. I know that I wasn't there. But so just broad-based presence and making sure that our industry had representation was really important. I think that is a great sign of the maturity of the industry and the recognition from the major stakeholders in this space that we need to deploy all the resources to make sure that this administration and this Congress act when it comes to cannabis, as opposed to just talk about it.
I definitely agree. I think having that visibility, that presence, and definitely sort of those lines of communication, super, super important, especially as we're heading into kind of an administration. I am curious because I think we've talked about it with, people in the cannabis industry previously in terms of how much engagement there has been in the past with previous administrations or sort of government around cannabis. This does feel different. Like you're saying, it feels like there is kind of a turning up in terms of attention and effort and time into kind of forming those connections and that lines of communication. Was there anything that was done kind of with the previous administration, or was that sort of like they had signaled they were going to be pro-cannabis and so there was less of a need? What was there anything kind of?
There's a lot of reasons why it's different now than it has been over prior years. I think just a recognition that we have put a lot of effort and a lot of resources into furthering the cause and obtaining reform at a federal level, especially over the last 3 years during the whole Biden administration. I think you see just a steady increase of attention, focus, resources being deployed. But each year, what we learned was it wasn't enough, and now we find ourselves in a position where, political affiliations aside, I think you have an administration that's coming in that is very intent on cutting through bureaucracy, red tape, and really arriving at common sense approaches to fundamental issues. And fortunately, I do think cannabis's position, cannabis's story, the data that we have, we're an industry that's legal in 40 out of 50 states for medical purposes or otherwise. The majority of Americans live in states that have legalized for adult use purposes. So, no longer can the federal government continue to ignore or bury their head in the sand when it comes to a common sense approach to this industry. And again, just fortunately for us, I think cannabis has a common sense story to tell that's supported by data, supported by years of trial, error, learnings, and experience at the state level that the federal government, this administration, should be ready to hear.
Yeah, I think that's good. And again, I think just getting those stories, because even if it is sort of a common sense issue, I think for a lot of people, I really do think it needs that elevation to kind of get it in front of the administration. And I think you guys are doing the work to do that. So very, very important. I think you did mention kind of the tone of the new administration coming in. I think before we had the inauguration day, it did seem like there was a sense that you're right. They are kind of a group that's going to do things differently and kind of cut through the red tape and try to really make changes fast and aggressively and kind of shake it up, kind of let old ways kind of fall behind. I know we're only a few days in. Do you feel like we're already starting to see sort of the truth in that and sort of the willingness to make good on those kind of promises?
Well, yeah, sort of commenting on areas outside of our purview or our industry, you're seeing action. I was just having a conversation this morning, at the inaugural celebration event, right at the CAP Center, they had a desk on stage, and again, setting the politics aside and the issues that were at hand, he's signing executive orders that day in that arena. So, objectively looking at it, it seems like an administration that is going to take action on issues that he has brought up along the campaign trail. And again, fortunately for us, cannabis has been part of that narrative. There were 3 very public, statements, whether digitally through Truth Social or Twitter, and also a long form couple of podcasts where he laid out his evolved position on our subject matter. And again, what I took mainly from it was the articulation that a common sense approach is needed here for cannabis. And again, I think the industry is going to be ready to meet him where he's at.
I definitely agree there. And I think, yeah, I definitely agree. So hopefully we'll see that come through, just kind of talking through where we find ourselves now and kind of how the new administration applies. I know there is still, rescheduling in the mix in terms of where things are, but I know that still depends on, new DEA head and kind of where things lie there. I had seen we had a interim appointment pick at least come through. What are your sort of general thoughts and feelings on sort of that pick so far in the rescheduling process under a new administration?
One of the things I think from the experiences over the last couple of years, I think we need to we need to have faith in again the data and the story that we can tell as it relates to cannabis, and also with political appointments. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt of their experience and their professionalism and the obligations that they're going to have to sort of analyze the situation at hand and make decisions on it in accordance with what the data is showing them, and also what the what the perspective of the broader administration wants to bring to the certain issues. And again, this is where I feel comfort in cannabis's position, in the data that we're able to display, the experiences that these state programs have been able to show. I always fall back in a comfortable position when 40 out of the 50 states in this country have made the legal determination that cannabis has medicinal value, that is in direct conflict with the Schedule I position that cannabis currently holds at a federal level. That needs to be fixed.
I think that makes sense. So yeah, sort of that contradiction and sort of that error cannot exist forever. Eventually it has to get sorted out. I think that's true. And especially like you're saying, you're right, as pressure mounts with more and more states and the majority of states having some sort of common sense cannabis approach, that kind of continues to put pressure on rectifying and kind of, rescheduling and finding a better way to approach cannabis, which is interesting. Okay, I think that's fantastic. In terms of the new interim pick again, I know there had been a focus, just as people are trying to digest things, had been a focus for him on opioids. And I think that's been kind of a focus for the administration as a whole as well, kind of clamping down on, an illicit market for opioids. Would love to hear, what you think in terms of the balance for, does that kind of help bolster the cannabis story and the pressure to have that legal framework? Or do you think it sort of takes away and distracts or kind of takes mind share from cannabis?
No, I think again, this is part of the narrative of the cannabis experiences, and what we've seen develop over the last 10 years. The studies, the data show a reduction in opioid abuse in states that have regulated cannabis programs. Um, one thing I do know about the interim appointment here at the DEA is adamantly against cartels being involved in the illicit drug trade, and clearly he's not going to have any pushback from the industry, who is saying, no, we totally agree. We're all a part of this industry because we want to be a part of the state legal regulated compliance focused structures that have been put in place. Again, I think the ability for a common sense approach to cannabis and a legal regulated compliance focused approach is good for public health. It's good for public safety. And I think we will have public safety focus and public health focused leaders that will see the common sense approach is the right way to do it. Whether you like cannabis or not, the alternative is the worst case scenario. So I like the position that we're in, regardless of who's at the helm, as long as a common sense approach is taken.
Yep, I think that makes sense. And I do think it is a funny thing, like you're saying. I think when you're kind of looking at different views on cannabis, whether they appear negative or appear positive, I think ultimately most people do want, something that is safe. I feel like a lot of the criticism I've heard sort of about cannabis and generally is more aimed at sort of the illicit market, or is aimed at children having access to cannabis, which again is not the aim at all of like a regulated real industry. So I think most people agree more than they think on kind of the approaches to cannabis, which is always kind of a refreshing and I think reassuring element for me as well. So
yeah, it's up to us to connect the dots, right?
Yeah.
And to make sure that sort of extreme predisposed positions or perspectives don't eliminate or wash over what the data and what the actual sort of approach, the recommendations that are being presented lay out. Because I do think either, again, experiences with the conversations that we've had over the last few years with legislators, even if they don't like cannabis, it's tough to say that you should not support a state's decision to create a law that puts a compliance focused regulated structure in place, and that you would actually prefer the alternative, which is, potentially a cartel led illicit market meeting the demand that exists in your state already, right? It's a tough position to take. So I like the message that we get to carry forward, and hopefully we've got an administration and a new Congress that's ready to act on it.
Yep, I definitely agree. Cutting through, finding that clarity and finding that common ground makes sense on that front, I think. And additionally, I think, the American jobs element, I think, is a very strong thing that can resonate with a lot of different politicians or groups as well. So I think there's a lot that is positive for the industry, which is great. I think that's all sort of on the political side. I know that's not really in the industry's control. Obviously, there's influence, but ultimately can't control, but can control from a business perspective how you guys are operating and kind of positioning yourself heading into this new year. Would love to start with just kind of high level, what are you looking at in 2025 that might be different even from previous years? Where's sort of the focus and drive?
Yeah, if I could do one last thing
Please.
before we move off the topic of the political realm, and I think very apropos for your audience and your sort of position in this industry, is you also have an administration where this conversation about this disparity between these U.S. companies that operate in accordance with the laws of these 40 out of 50 states that employ roughly 500,000, 500,000 U.S. People in their operations, generated, I want to say it's $4.5 billion a year in annual excise taxes for state programs, that we are not allowed to have access to this country's arguably greatest asset, which is our capital markets and our exchanges. And cannabis companies that operate in other countries are allowed to have access and currently trade on the NYSE and NASDAQ, taking U.S. investor money and deploying it in other countries. I don't know that we have an administration that would be better suited to cut through that current situation and rectify it than the one that is currently in office. So I think, not to get ahead of ourselves, but when you talk about a common sense approach to cutting through bureaucratic things that make zero sense, I would challenge any industry to present a fact set that's more difficult to see why it should continue than what U.S. cannabis has as it relates to capital markets.
No, I think that is a great point. I appreciate you taking the time to mention that. I think that's important.
So now I'll go to Crespo.
No, please, yeah.
I think this is a big part of sort of our initiative as an organization is to pursue and to really commit to obtaining this change at a federal level. The base business and operations are functioning really well, and the broader team there is just showing the strength and the experience that they've been able to get over the last couple of years to really design procedures and approaches to markets that are intelligent and that are as dynamic as the markets that we operate in are, because this is anybody who understands what it's like to be a vertically integrated operator in an industry like cannabis. It's very unique. There aren't many industries at all where you actually literally grow the agricultural product from a clone or a seed, and then you manufacture products through it, you distribute them, and you also own the brick and mortar retail, but you also sell into competitors. Oh, and you also carry your competitors' products on your shelves. Like, this is a scenario that is very complex and very dynamic, more so than most industries. And we've got a team that does a phenomenal job of navigating this. But really, you will continue to see a very committed level of engagement from us at the federal level, because the ultimate unlock, as we've seen, it needs federal reform. Yep. You've got a lot of great functioning, fundamentally sound, financially sound organizations in cannabis, but with this capital market setup, you're not seeing the value in those organizations at all, or a fraction of what true value is. So we need to continue to focus on federal reform. It's the ultimate unlock.
And again, I think you guys are putting in that effort and time, so I think that's fantastic. From like a more fundamental perspective, though, in the meantime, what is sort of the things, I think team very important, but is there anything that you guys are doing now that you are seeing have really strong results in terms of moving product or finding efficiencies or things that you don't have to give away your entire secret sauce, of course, but if there's something that you are really leaning into that is finding some impact, what would you kind of point to?
Yeah, well, I think for us, we're in a really nice position going into 25, that we've done a lot of hard work over the last couple of years, sort of outwardly professing the sort of year of the core in 23, which really made us focus on the main components that drive, whether it's the traditional 80-20 rule or other ways to think about it. There's certain elements of our business that really drive our success. And so real detailed laser focus on that in 23. In 24, I think internally we sort of referred to it as more from the core in 24. We like rhymes and jingles. Sure. They're memorable. Yeah. And then as we look at 25, since we've done this work, since we have created as much efficiency as we have and sort of stability in the operations, not that we're moving away from it, because that really is part of our DNA now. It's how we think about every decision that we make is, can we do it more efficiently? Can we reduce costs here? Can we drive out performance at a top line level there? But now we get to add, so if 25, maybe the jingle is add more to the core in the year ahead, because we don't have exposure to some of these markets that our peers already do. And it's going to give us the opportunity to sort of close the gap and reduce the delta from our performance from a really strong base. So states like, we're evaluating New Jersey, we're evaluating Maryland, we're evaluating new markets like Kentucky that we're excited about and present new opportunity that we can add on top of this strong core base that we have and that the team's created.
That is awesome. And that's great to be, again, I think looking forward to that growth, I think is very, very strong. And some markets that I think have been doing well. So great to be able to get access to that. In terms of existing markets and things like that, where's sort of the focus? I know you can put pressure on a federal level to try to move things along and hopefully see that really, really strong change. Is there any pressure that you can put on even a state level to try to get, I know with like Pennsylvania, there's been some back and forth, but it seems like they're getting closer and closer and closer to finally putting some change in from a rec perspective. Anything kind of on that end that has been useful or interesting or?
Yeah, I think you hit it. I think Pennsylvania is the state to watch. The industry is, with the unfortunate outcome, and with Florida not getting across the finish line last year, those medical to adult use transitions are big for our industry. They're big for a lot of reasons, to show progress at a legislative level, but also for the P&L impacts and the sort of the total addressable market impact. It's important that these larger states do continue to progress and show that regulated approach to cannabis, whether at a medicinal level or at an adult use level, is the path forward. And Pennsylvania would clearly be next on that list. I think there was I saw a statement from the Governor Shapiro come out, I think last night, commenting on it, and his comments were in line with what our sort of understanding has been, is that he's committed to pushing this forward this year. He sees not only the economic opportunity that exists in his state. They've shown that they can do medical well. It's one of the most robust, highly regulated, compliance-focused medical programs in the country. And it's nice, responsible equals respectable equals robust is something we talk about a lot. I think Pennsylvania has shown that they've done that to create a very robust medical market, and they're ready to transition to adult use. And especially with New Jersey on one side and Ohio on the other, it makes a ton of sense. So we're optimistic about that becoming a reality in 25.
That is super exciting. I think it would be a great year if we were able to do Eagles at the Super Bowl. That'd be awesome. And then cannabis, you could do like Super Bowl. There's something cannabis related, some sort of pun there.
Definitely something there.
All right. Well, fingers crossed in Pennsylvania, because again, I know that's one that has been closed for a while. And I think it's one of those things where it will probably just turn over, I think, quicker than people realize potentially when we get there. So hopefully we see that. But either way, I think it is very much still in the conversation, which I think is encouraging. And that's what you want to see. And then in terms of existing markets, how much are you guys sort of like reviewing locations and kind of getting a sense of where things are, or was all that work done already in 2024 when you were kind of strengthening that core element?
Well, I tell you, the thing that we brought out of 23 and 24 is that work's never going to stop. I think we can continue to refine, we can continue to find efficiencies, and we can continue to optimize. So if we look at it in sort of that bifurcated way of how do we create growth for Cresco in 25 and the years ahead, it is continuing to optimize and fortify the markets that we're already in, and then get into the markets that we're not in yet, that have the right economic and regulatory structure that create success for years ahead. And we've got opportunities on both sides, which is great.
Yep, that's awesome. All right, love to hear that. The only other thing that I think I would love to touch on is, I think we briefly mentioned it, sort of the collaboration that we've seen kind of in the industry. I know in 25 / the end of 24, there's been more of a uniting and a strengthening of the cannabis industry to kind of work together to get messages through both, stateside, but obviously, of course, on a federal side. Would love to hear just a little bit more about kind of how that works, how that fits into 2025 in terms of working together, having that unified voice, and kind of what you expect to get from it ultimately.
I think there's a lot of moving pieces, because the industry has developed, and especially on the advocacy side and the lobbying side, has developed in a bit of a fragmented way, which I would also say I don't think is unique to an emerging industry. And this is honest. This is what we've been hearing and what we've been told over the last couple of years is it's time for cannabis to mature and become a more of a traditional approach to having these conversations and being present in these arenas at a state level and at a federal level. We've heard legislators tell us it's real easy to say no when multiple groups claiming to have the perspective of one subject matter come in and ask for different things. That's you're not polished enough to get the response that you want from legislators who are in deference to the legislators on the obligations that they have. They have to share mind with 1,000 different things that they have to weigh in on. And the obligation of any industry or any stakeholder that's trying to present them with a path forward, let alone an ask. Like if you're trying to make an ask of them, you better be tight, you better be aligned, you better have one unified voice, because then they can listen to you. You've done the work, you've put them in a position to be successful. If you're coming to a legislator with different asks and then asking them to kind of piece through the different perspectives to come up with the right answer, it's easy to say no to that and move on to one of the other 999 things that they need to think about. So, there's more to it than that. There's the inefficiencies, I would say, that we all sort of started to recognize too, of where resources were just being diluted because we were doing them in a disconnected, disjointed way, these efforts, and it's not the way to create efficiencies and way to create targeted, very useful allocation of resources. So I think it's just an example of the industry and the major stakeholders within the industry maturing and understanding what we need to do in order to create the change that we want. And you're seeing those actions, you're seeing that collaboration and coordination, and you'll see more of it throughout the year.
That's awesome. And again, yeah, definitely agree. Seems like a super positive thing, having that shared voice, that shared vision, that shared ask potentially. So in 2025, is the goal sort of to continue to grow that pool and sort of that organization? Do you need to have practically everyone in at the same spot, or is it sort of like you can get kind of larger players? What's sort of the balance there?
Yeah, I think there's value in having maybe different voices that have different perspectives continue to have those voices and have those platforms. But there needs to be coordination of the messaging and the asks, and that the difference between the voice is really it's additive, and it's clarifying as opposed to being confusing and being disjointed. So no, I don't think that we all have to be part of one organization or one association. I do see value in having a variety of a perspective that's being brought, but to the same message and to the same ask. So that's going to be part of our obligation, is to make sure that we find the way to create that coordination and collaborative cooperation. And as we go forward and have those same conversations with those same recipients. Yep.
No, I think that makes sense. In terms of industries, just kind of breaking it out a little bit further, is there any room for kind of the hemp industry in that to try to find a shared vision, or is it sort of wanting to keep it relatively, not purist, but relatively focused, I guess, and targeted on cannabis itself?
No, I think at the end of the day, it's one plant. THC is THC is THC, and we need to figure out how that voice and that coordination happens in the appropriate way, because that is inherent confusion and noise that will continue to create complications and an easy opportunity. It's what do they say, a distinction without a difference.
Yeah.
This definition that's been put in the Farm Bill of what hemp is versus what cannabis is it's a fallacy. It is arbitrary, but that's on us to, again, coordinate the efforts to make sure that at the broadest level, the way that the U.S. government thinks about the active ingredient makes sense. And right now it doesn't.
Yep, I think that makes sense. So still a lot of education, still a lot of contextualizing and kind of, cutting through, I think, the noise on that front, which is great. All right, well, I think that's solid. I would love to, just because I feel like it's an exciting year, but also a busy year, a lot of work for you guys, would love to just spend a second to say, what are you excited about? What keeps you still, fired up and ready for cannabis? And I'd love to just end there.
Honestly, it's this. I think we're closer than we ever have been. If I look at the last 2 years as doing the groundwork to educate legislators, because don't forget, laws get passed by legislators, not by necessarily the executive branch. So you still have to put in the ground game. And I've always been, anybody should be concerned about laws getting passed by lawmakers that don't know enough about the underlying issue.
Yes.
And so a lot of good ground game has been developed and achieved over the last couple of years. But now it is at the highest level where we do need to just continue the education, but that the scenario, the structure that's in place with this administration and this Congress, I think gives this subject matter of cannabis the highest likelihood of success that we've seen so far.
That is exciting.
Yeah, so that's exciting.
I feel like that's awesome. And I do think it is sort of that same trend and theme that you're talking about with Cresco itself, where you're building on that investment, you're putting in that time, you're, watering those seeds and everything else. And, kind of at a point where things are really budding and getting exciting. So very, very excited to hear that. Very excited to keep checking in kind of through the rest of the year as the administration kind of, works through some of the issues that they're working through. But fantastic. Really appreciate you taking the time, Charlie. It's always great to kind of hear your perspective and kind of what you're seeing and hearing as well. I think that wraps it up. Thanks everyone also for joining. Really, really appreciate it. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.